Welcome to Crowning, the weekly show where birthing is a portal to your power. My name is Siobhan Duras, and I'm a birth and spirit worker based in San Francisco, California. And I show heart led parents how to alchemize their fears of childbirth and rise as the leaders that your ancestors have been praying for. So, this week we are going to get into the evidence on energy work for childbirth. But before we dive into all that, you know what? Is my sound working? I want to make sure my sound is working before I continue. Oop. Let's switch microphones. Oh, I think we're good. We're good here. Okay. I have a little bit of feedback on my end. So hopefully we're good. If you're in the chat, let me know. But let's begin. So, like I said, the title says this week we're going to get into the evidence of energy work for childbirth, and it's going to be a lot more expansive than that. My background is as a Reiki practitioner. I started as a full spectrum doula on the less spiritual side, and I talked a little bit last week about how in 2021, so 5 years ago, I had a peer in a business program approach me who was newly pregnant, who was a Reiki practitioner herself, and she offered to train me one-on-one in Reiki in exchange for my services. And we did that. It opened my world. That coincided with the meaning I was already making after attending home births in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. And really, it's been this like pipeline ever since into the more mystical side of birthing and what's available to us in the energy. And so, if you have been connected with me for the last few years, then it doesn't surprise you that this is a modality I've been working with because I've talked about it a lot. But what I have not talked much about is the actual evidence for it and the scientific backing, if you will. And so I want to explore more of that today. I was surprised and of course excited to find that there are over 100, I think 140 something studies out there having to do with Reiki in relation to measurable health outcomes. And they are not all having to do with birth, but kind of as we know, like childbirth touches on so many things. It touches on pain management, on mental health, on our physical healing as people with uteruses. And so there's a lot of lenses to look at this from and a lot of evidence to dig into. And pretty much all of it supports what I've intuitively been doing the last few years, which is bringing Reiki into my doula work. And the first client who hired me pre-conception for this long-term Reiki work is who opened up this framework I call now the birth realm. And that is a practice of not only doing it started as doing Reiki sessions as I was trained to, and then it really evolved after I then began studying more mediumship and espiritismo, and especially trance journey frameworks, paired with then my studies the last year and a half of hypnosis and neuroscience. So there's just a really sweet intersection of all of these that we're gonna dig more into today and just see what have um, clinicians and academia and people whose roles are to look for to do trials and evidence and like quantify the impacts of all this. What do they have to say? So I'm excited by that. Before we get into it, I'm going to share our rainbow of readiness to assess if you are in a place today to engage with the fullness of what crowning can offer, which usually it's intended to be a grounded place for us to process heavier information. The topic's a little lighter today. In fact, there was one story that was potentially more on the activating end in terms of like upsetting and triggering, but I couldn't find the link when I was looking back for it today. I somehow lost it. So I'm just going to mention that later. But otherwise, compared to probably earlier episodes, this is going to be less on the intensity scale in terms of unpacking all of the problematicness and systemic harms of the birth industry, but because that can always slip in at any time and birth is sensitive to anyone depending on who you are, please take a look at this rainbow, decide for yourself if you're in a good place today to engage with this headier information. Personally, I'm sitting at a 4. On a little bit of a more activated end. We had a time change here in California where we quote lost an hour, and that is hitting me in the mornings. So today I went and I got a Vietnamese iced coffee, and then that just kind of like sent me a little bit. I feel the heart rate increase and a little higher anxiety thanks to that iced coffee, and I only drank half of it. So you will not see me with iced coffee today. Wherever you're at, I recommend grabbing your water. I'm going to take a sip of water now. While you can drop in the chat if you'd like to let me know where you're sitting at today, as we'll do a little bit of energy work as well. Hi, Soleil. Welcome. I'm excited for this one and to see who's in the audience. I have someone who I will be doing more of this, having our first birth realm journey this week. And so this is a fun, lighter episode, like I said. And honestly, there's so much evidence that I don't really want to peel through every single one. So we're just going to kind of like hop around through what is out there, what people have looked at, and what kind of opportunities there are, as well as maybe just like what evidence I've gathered on my own through doing this for 4 years actively, I would say. I would say 5 years since I really started that training. And we'll get into a little more of the background of Reiki if you're completely new to the concept. And I'll also explain why I'm right now using it sort of interchangeably with energy work and what little asterisks lie in there. But the first thing I kind of wanted to talk about was a follow-up from last week. So kind of on my heart from our follow-up of last week, which last week we talked about the evidence for doulas. So we took a look at evidence-based birth, super comprehensive breakdown of all the studies that exist to support the existence of the roles of doulas. And then this morning I saw this. I want to see if I can find it. It was on Instagram and I lost it. But there was this video that I saw this morning of it was from Georgia. And it was in March 2026. So I'm going to see if that will help us. Let's see. So I can't find it just yet. But both of these were in Georgia. If you remember last week, we took a look at this letter that was posted that said, due to unforeseen circumstances, you cannot have a doula. And we looked at what all the evidence of what doulas do looks like. And it is, support people having their desired outcomes, 38% decrease of cesareans, especially high impact for people who are not white, because of the ways that they are seen and supported, and looking at that in contrast with increasing hospital policies that do not want doulas in the birthing room. And so the video I saw this morning was a doula who posted it, a Black doula in Georgia with her client, who's a Black woman. And in this video, the nurse, I believe, was speaking. They didn't show the nurse, but I think it was a nurse or hospital staff speaking on behalf of the doctor, saying that the doctor wanted everybody removed. All the support people are removed, and you can come back tomorrow, is what they were saying. And in this video, the doula was saying, why she's going to be alone. She does not want to be alone. Why are you not allowing anyone to be here? You are inventing a rule. And they said, well, that's our hospital policy. And the doula says, well, your hospital policy cannot override her rights. And she, in fact, shared a screenshot of the right that people have to not birth alone. And so what this video really showed us was the ways that these hospitals are really taking it upon themselves to be antagonistic to not only doulas, but people having anybody in the hospital to support them. And those studies we took a look at last week showed that while doulas are bringing down these while doulas have really supportive statistics on their own, there's also heavily supportive evidence for just having someone there. And the doula, so it was like, I think 25% decrease of cesarean if you have any support person, and then 38% decrease if you have a trained doula. So to me, this really speaks to something foundational that I bring in a lot, not only in my work here, but also my work with Church of Soft Power, which is the lay-led church for artists that I co-founded, where we gather to co-regulate a lot and gather to do a lot of nervous system-based practices. And that's the evidence we're going to even see today in some of the studies that I've pulled up, is just this heavy evidence of what we're able to do when we are in connection with someone else that supports us, not even somebody that is actively doing anything for us or speaking on our behalf, just the power that we have when we perceive our connection to somebody else, and especially somebody else that we trust. And so the evidence is growing and growing that solidarity is science. As a Filipino American, there's a concept called Kapwa that speaks to this inherent understanding of our connection that's beyond community. It is really seeing and recognizing that we are intertwined energetically, physically, and that this is why it's naturally political, is because our freedom, there are many leaders who said that our freedom is intertwined with one another. No one's free till we're all free. And what I'm bringing in today is really kind of like that scientific evidence that supports that, not only that we're connected, but our ability to liberate ourselves and one another when we recognize this connection that we carry with other beings. So already swirling into all the directions, because this topic excites me. Evidence for things that we have known excites me. And I also feel called to just name that it's not validated because of the science. However, I recognize the world that we're in, where scientific evidence can help us to dissolve our own and continue to heal and unravel from a lot of our colonial conditioning that says these things are pseudoscience, that spirituality is something that we're like evolving beyond. And really, what I believe is that we're like remembering the inherentness of our spiritual selves. And that isn't to bypass what's going on here on earth, but that is to bring us closer to our role here on earth. And that's my desired outcome for bringing all of this in. So I said in my outreaches and promotion that today we are going to, later in this episode, I'm going to share the one thing that anybody can learn to support with pain management that is evidence-based. So I think we're going to save that for after we get into the evidence so that there's a little more context on the front end. But let's pull today a card. And today I'm going to pull a card from the Modern Nirvana Oracle. And, oh, it's right there. This one? Yes. Ooh, reflection. Reflection. And I love this one. It's got a shell-shaped hand mirror with pearls. As mother of pearl, I approve this message. And this is absolutely the theme today, the power of reflection, the power of being witnessed. There's that phrase that's like, if a tree falls in the forest and no one heard it, did it happen? I don't really fully understand that until recently. I was like, oh, are they talking about like, yeah, like this, there's so much, and this is getting very like metaphysical, but there is something is not real. There's like concepts that things are not real until they're shared or witnessed. And that is kind of a like quantum physicists don't come for me, but the use of like quantum physics that is in kind of like a spiritual metaphysical way, that really speaks to like everything is in motion, is ever changing, is not solid or real until it's being witnessed and perceived. So that actually directly ties into what we're going to talk about today with Reiki, because this is all about the power of being seen, of being present with one another, the power of touch, to perceive less pain, less stress, less worry and fear. And those are the things that support a positive birth outcome. Is I don't always say your safety. I focus on your perception of safety, because many people can be in the same situation. Some perceive it as safe, some perceive it as a threat. And this is where my work has gravitated towards over the years, because the more I understand the power of our own perception, and dig into how that's different from our control over the situation, the more people are able to have their desired birth outcomes, even if the things don't go as planned, even if the outcome is not as they desired. The people who have that ability to connect with themselves and connect with their trusted partners, doulas, loved ones, those are the people who are coming out of even the most sideways birthing scenarios and still being able to say like, yeah, I'm not traumatized because I was in connection with myself and my voice and able to make decisions throughout that I felt seen. That's the number one thing that clients tend to look for coming out of their prenatals, out of their birth experiences. Like, did you feel seen by your provider? Did you feel heard? And that is the power of reflection. So let's just take a look at some of these studies today. The first one I want to look at is just what is Reiki in the first place. what is Reiki? And this article comes from UCLA Health. And again, I realize the contradiction of saying that, pulling these studies to like validate what we're doing. Um, it's like both, it's a both and thing. So one, these institutions are flawed, can have violent and racist histories, all of that. And also there is something about the peer review process that academia, the standard that is held in these spaces, that is um, that it's a place where these things are done. It's a place with resources to obtain this research that is supportive to the community. And my dream always is for us to create ways of resourcing and resourcing people to do this type of research in ways that still honor the dignity of everyone involved. And so, you know, that's we're in a time of bridging all these things, bridging um, seeking institutional validation while also utilizing what opportunities are made available through these institutions and their resources. So I'm gonna share, let's see, share this screen here and look at what's Reiki, because there's two ways that we talk about Reiki. Um, and the two kind of like orientations to the word is one, um, the actual tradition, Reiki, founded by Mikao Usui, who was a Buddhist monk, who the story is that he, about 100 years ago, I think early 1920s, walked to walked Mount Karama and was like enlightened with this information, enlightened with this practice, and from there launched schools and lineages that have expanded and were used as supplemental therapy for people in times of war. Then it really spread to the West, and those lineages have kind of been enmeshed with other traditions that are not necessarily from this culture. And I think when we get into the conversation of cultural appropriation, oftentimes people bring in Reiki as an example of an appropriated practice. And the truth is that Reiki as an institution is very new age, has blended other traditions, and is by no means pure. And so it is an open practice. It is one that many people get trained during weekend training programs or retreats where people can like go for 2 or 3 days and come out with a certification. And if you do that more times, you can come out and call yourself a master. And so I say that I've studied at the master level of Holy Fire Usui Reiki, but I don't consider myself a master of it because it will just take a very long time. And also the that lineage itself has debatable origins. Now, I didn't go to weekend workshops to learn it. I had one-on-one training, which is less common, and I'm really grateful for that. And intuitively, this practice of um, sharing energy, and especially if we're going to root it back to Japan, I, after I trained, discovered that my one auntie, RIP, who passed this last winter, Rosie, she's part of a more close lineage um, of similar practice and was giving me that healing work when I was born. So it's a little full circle thing for me. It's something I'm still untangling from um, the less rooted practices that are out there. And that is different from how it is referred to in the studies and hospital system. So, sharing all of that to say that there's like the actual lineage of Reiki by that exact name. And then there is the way that we use the word Reiki as a catch all for energy work, for intuitive palm healing. Other cultures and religions might call it laying hands. Faith healing is another one. So, that's what we're talking about here. This is not getting into the symbols and specific methods of Usui Reiki that are more prevalent in trainings today that call themselves Reiki trainings. Um, Now, I have a whole other conversation on this, digging into all of the origins and how I've worked and moved through these questions of the integrity of that. And I'll link that in the show notes. That conversation was with Marta Elise, who is also a practitioner and an animal communicator. And we dug into that and also how we have evolved our practices since then. I also took a online course called Decolonizing Reiki with Marika Clymer, who is of Indigenous Ainu heritage, which is an Indigenous group in the lands known now as Japan. And so that really helped me to discover my own earth-based healing practice. And for me, being earth-based, especially, is being rooted here on land in better known as San Francisco, that is an occupied land of the Ohlone peoples. And this is a land that I have lived on all of my life. This is a land that informs my energy work. And I'll have a lot more to say about that as time goes on in terms of what it means to be somebody that is a mixed heritage. I'm Filipino and I'm Irish, as well as many other European lineages. But what it means to work with spirits that are of my ancestral lands, but not of my present lands that I'm settled on. Um, I could really go down that rabbit hole, but I think I'm going to take us back right here for now to what's the definition that these hospitals and researching bodies are looking at, because that's important. So here we go. Can I get rid of this sidebar? There we go. Here we go. All right. Yay. So let's just look at the definition. So Reiki touch therapy is a complementary biofield energy therapy. So complementary meaning it complements medical care. So it supplements medical care. It's in addition to medical care. And it's a biofield. The biofield is your energetic body, your subtle body, it's sometimes called, maybe often referred to as like your aura. But that's what they mean by biofield energy therapy, that involves the use of hands to help strengthen the body's ability to heal. So, the word Reiki means universal life force energy, ki being that life force, which you may also be familiar with as chi, or yeah, here we go, chi. That's in here. I'm always jumping ahead here. But that is life force energy. When we talk about Qigong, which is a traditional Chinese practice of moving the energetic body for our wellness, for many of us, especially Asian people, people of Asian descent, this is embedded in our cultures. I grew up with people doing Tai Chi outside. My neighbors still every day are out here. I live in a very Chinese neighborhood. And it's something that right now I'm mentioning that because there's so many trends right now of like being in a Chinese time of your life on TikTok where these Chinese practices are being adapted, and I'm seeing people get very interested in principles of traditional Chinese medicine for wellness, people globally. So it's very fascinating to see what is like cherry picked and brought in as like just what's cherry picked and brought into institutions, right? It's stuff again that has to have like a productive outcome that's measurable, which we see here with Reiki. We also see like acupuncture has been embraced. And so when it comes into this, one thing I'm always looking for is then how is it also minimizing the truly spiritual nature of it? Because this is spiritual stuff. This is stuff that is um, that sits in a culture that Western worlds refer to as like for example, the ways that Latin American literature is referred to as magical realism. Um, and I remember learning that phrase in high school and them explaining the genre as like, well, for these people, it's where magic is, they believe magic is real and normalized. And there's like a whole thing. And I'm like, it's just indigenous culture worldwide, where animism is the norm, spirituality is the norm. So, anyways, again, back to the article. Hi, Merrick. Great to see you in here. So, there is a growing interest among nurses to use Reiki in patient care and as a self care treatment. However, with little supportive empirical research and evidence to substantiate these practices, the purpose of this review is to begin the systematic process of evaluating the findings of published Reiki research. Selected investigations using Reiki for effects on stress, relaxation, depression, pain, and wound healing management, among others, is reviewed and summarized. So, like I said, we're here talking about birthing and pregnancy, but all of those things come in and can get exacerbated during pregnancy: stress, depression, pain, healing management. We have pretty much studies to pull on all of these things. So, this breaks down what is Reiki. It's an energy-based touch therapy that provides a means for life force energy or chi to recharge, realign, and rebalance the human energy fields, creating optimal conditions needed by the body's natural healing system. Reiki, similar to other touch therapies, such as therapeutic touch and healing touch, involves the use of energy directed by the practitioner's hands to strengthen the body's ability to heal, inspiring balance, and involves a mind body connection. Reiki is the Japanese term for universal life energy, a visible and palpable life force energy that infuses and permeates all living forms, a vibrational, pulsating, universal energy. So, for Christians, you might just say the Holy Spirit. And that is why, as a person of Irish descent, usually for Irish are also very colonized into the Catholic Church. And so this tradition would maybe be referred to as like faith healing. Like she's a faith healer, which is something I've been kind of like opening and warming up to. I talk about every show these like new titles that I'm playing with. But I think the one thing I'll say about the difference of the how this is described here and the Reiki tradition that I was trained in is that there are a lot of symbols that are charged in Usui Reiki. You might have heard like Chokure is one. And so it's something I actually no longer use. And there's kind of hot debates about what these symbols have been charged with and the ethics of placing these symbols on your energetic body, which is what supposedly happens when you get trained and gosh, why am I blanking on the word right now? Not activated. It'll come back to me. But when you get activated in Reiki, um, there is this belief that the person, and this is what my teacher did, was like guide me in an experience, give me the symbols, and then that awakened my abilities. And so, like I said, today we're going to do a little practice of you just charging your own, and we could start right now. I mean, it's as simple as charging your hands, rubbing them together, warming them up, feeling them heat up, and placing them somewhere on your body. And as you continue to breathe in, imagining the life force pulling up from the earth, that's a practice in Qigong, and imagining on your exhale, directing that energy through your palms to your chosen intention. So you can do that right now. If you're pregnant, you can place them on your belly and send that energy to your baby. And if you are not, you can send it to anywhere on you that feels like it could use some love. And a big foundational piece of this is just trusting your own intuition. It's Reiki has helped me to the practice of Reiki that I started with really, really helped me with learning to observe the way energy is flowing through my body and to strengthen my own belief that where my presence is placed um, has a power to direct that energy. And so in that sense, to me, that's magic. Last week we talked a lot about presence and the power of that. So let's dig into this. I want to see what methods they were looking at here. So they were looking for organizational, they're looking at organizations with research, and let's see. This article I'm not as interested in terms of like this is just giving us a breakdown of how trials look at this. Um, so these studies are categorized by study area with placebos. And here we go. I wanted to see a 20-minute session of Reiki treatment versus a Reiki placebo treatment. Now that's interesting to me because I wonder what that placebo, like to them, they're calling a placebo, let's see, people who are not trained. And again, I kind of believe that people have access to this. Like literally when you like bump your elbow and you rub it and are like trying to soothe it. To me, that's a form of, by these definitions, Reiki and energy healing. So I think inherently all of this is going to be flawed in the sense of are they talking about people who are using the symbols and the power of these Japanese symbols to bring healing and to impact the body? I don't think that's what we're looking at. I think they're, let's see, I wanted to see this like mock Reiki was given by a person who mimicked the hand positions, not attuned to any degree or level of Reiki. Now, again, I think that those people could still have an impact because, as we're going to get into, a lot of this has to do with the power of witnessing, the power of touch, the power of humans in connection. And even on a biological level, which we'll take a look at, that could be described as simple as the power of oxytocin, which is a hormone that flows when we're in connection with one another. And because of that, that oxytocin has a pain relieving aspect to it, has an aspect of connection and in pregnancy or in labor to increase your contractions and to move labor along. Um, from based on that, it's not really so much about the symbols and the tradition that the person studied as it is about their presence just being there and the fact that the recipient feels safe. So let's just see, what do we got here? A lot of references here, but let's just get to the conclusion. In conclusion, energy work with Reiki allows a compassionate connection through touch and presence between the provider and recipient with intent to help or heal. The persistence of the metaphor hands on to mean touch with intent to heal represents the essence of many of today's holistic nursing practices. Healing touch practices pervade nursing history, and the reemergence of holistic models, strengthened by societal demands, is suggestive of efforts to bring the heart back into the work of nursing. Hmm. Endorsement of energy work by the American Holistic Nurses Association, as well as the visionary healing guidance from Florence Nightingale and Modern Voices. Don't know who they are. Um, yeah, there's potential here. Wow. Caring nurses have potential to heal. Who would have thought that your nurse not trying to actively kill you might have a positive outcome? I wish I could find that video that I wanted to show y'all of this nurse basically trying to isolate this patient in Georgia. I will share that in the follow up and dig deeper when we're not live. This author believes, that's right, it's giving Bridgerton. This author believes now is the time to call for leadership from nurse scientists to explore alternative paradigms of inquiry most suitable for nursing science to connect with and establish evidence for these evolving humanistic practices. Yeah, put the care back in healthcare, okay? So love that. And let me come back to my notes a little bit here. Let's see. So I'm gonna come back to, really, I'm not gonna read through all of these. I'm kind of gonna read my highlights because there was a lot. There just is a lot. And so there is growing evidence around Reiki for pain and stress. And this paper here evaluates the data gathered from 10-minute Reiki sessions and administered to members of high stress communities in a variety of settings. One of the most conclusive studies was done in Turkey, and the result was recommending. This one's in Chicago. So let's just look at the overview because we don't got all the memberships to dig into all of this. But the results will indicate that it reduces perceptions of stress and pain, and it may be beneficial as a means for trained individuals outside the healthcare system to address stress and pain for members of their own communities. So that's pretty interesting, and again, speaks to this power of being witnessed. So here they describe Reiki as a non-invasive, or just define it as a non-invasive modality, showing significant promise in reducing stress and pain levels across diverse populations. This study focuses on brief community Reiki sessions um, in communities in Chicago. So their objective is to analyze changes in self-reported stress and pain levels before and after 10-minute sessions among high stress groups. And they were asked open-ended questions such as, how do you feel? How did that go? And the feedback was recorded. No demographic or baseline health information was collected. Let's see. And the results were, let's see. They provided this to 1,724 members of high stress communities throughout Chicago, and majority of people, 72% reduction overall. Majority of people reported a significant change in stress. 72.62% reduction overall, and 63.34 reduction overall in pain following a single 10-minute session. Most participants felt very relaxed and reported feeling less pain and a profound surprise at the positive outcome post session. The conclusion here is that it's provided valuable insight to how people perceive the impact of Reiki in both stress and pain levels. Um, they all took place in non clinical settings, but more rigorous research is needed to evaluate the impact um, of in non clinical settings and repeated sessions over time. So I like looking at that. Um, and one thing, let's see, I mean, the highlights here that I see are also the power of being held by somebody in your own community. That seems pretty big, especially last week when we looked at the evidence for doulas. And one of the biggest claims and conclusions was the importance of people being held by their own communities as well. And specifically, they were speaking about communities of color and what that means for somebody to have an advocate from a similar background. And that's something that is thankfully very normalized in the doula community, is recognizing how important that shared identity and how significant that can be for people. Early on in my doula career, I learned and was that um, taught to refer clients who have identities that I don't, and how to recognize. One of the first practices we did with Cornerstone Doula trainings was looking at our identities and what privileges as well as disadvantage um, or I don't know, disempowered, under resourced, oppressed identities we have. And so, while in the beginning I served more when it comes to personal friends, that's one thing, but again, that's another factor of safety. But when it comes to people who seek me out, I learned pretty early on to be abundant in referring, for example, trans men who are giving birth. Because there are aspects about that experience that I can't relate to, and I carry biases that could come up in their most vulnerable moments, it is often recommended to refer trans men to other trans birth workers. Same with Black folks. It's there. I learned that from a doula in New York who said it's just a no. It's not. I wouldn't say that applies in the Bay Area as much, from what I've seen, but I'm sure it's evolved. But I remember in the beginning a doula from New York saying, "Oh, it's just known that you don't take Black clients if you're not Black," um, and all of this evidence seems to sort of support that in terms of the power and importance on the perceived safety, stress levels, um, and pain when it comes to being held by somebody that is of your same community. Now, I do think there are asterisks to that. Of course, there's personal relationships that come in. There are aspects of privilege that maybe, again, I don't want to get into like the idea of somebody being a savior by not being part of those groups, but it is ultimately up to the client to choose. And if they, there may be instances where people feel safer choosing someone who doesn't share all of their marginalized identities because they might feel safer with that. So I always come back to the individual and what they desire, and doing everything we can to um, help them access what will help them feel safest. So I'm gonna go back to my notes. So let's look at this one. This is the Hartford Hospital. This one was looking at energy work, and here they're calling it energy medicine. that's another way of looking at it. And this little chart here shows that there were decreases in anxiety as well as pain levels um, pre and post treatment. Not super dramatic, but it's there. This article is kind of giving a look at what it is. And what I like is that it's looking at kind of how Reiki works, which is looking at frequency. And so it says from trained practitioners, the hertz level using the squid magnetometer um, that measures a vibrational frequency coming from your hands, they can measure zero point 0.3 hertz to 30, going from, yeah, to 30 hertz um, of an increased energy vibrational frequency. So the most frequent measurement observed was 7 to 8 hertz, the vibrational frequency found most often in nature, in harmony, and in the music that research has shown to be the most healing. So I thought that was cool to look at, that there are measurable um, ways to measure what that energy looks and feels like. Some people just feel like it's just hot, like their hands are getting really hot. I've been one of the most special things for me over time has been the way that my mom can really recognize it, and that she even calls me and asks me to send her Reiki sometimes. And there's one time that I can think of when we were driving back from my sister's home a couple hours away, and she was riding in the front seat, and she was saying how her back was hurting, and I started sending her Reiki, just not like just I was sitting in the back seat of my dad's minivan and them in the front, and that she was like, she just goes, "Thanks, Bonnie." That's what she calls me. And that, um, I forget who, it was my dad or someone was like, "For what?" And she was like, "Oh, because I can feel it. I can feel the Reiki she's doing." And I'm like, "We're not even touching. We're sitting, I'm in the back with my kid." And people are surprised that she can feel that relief immediately. So just some um, anecdotal evidence there. So let's see. And again, that's ancestral in a way. I think that is part of like decolonizing the family for me, is like having that be normalized, um, having over time. I think this evidence has informed the embracing of ancestral things in a way that, like I mentioned earlier, not wanting to like I don't wanna over rely on science to validate what we're doing. However, in the context of the world we're in, that is sometimes what it takes, is seeing something measurable, and that is what can, I think, restore faith. That is what can restore, our pre-colonial ways of being. Sometimes it takes a little bit of evidence and a little proof of miracles for folks to just re-embrace our ye olden ways. So let's see. This is an interesting kind of conversation here they're starting, saying, although we're beginning to measure energy fields and energy transference, the mechanism is still uncertain. Since the practitioner's hands are placed over energy pathways used by acupuncturists, is there a release of endorphins as in acupuncture? Is it a release of nitric oxide nitric oxide, since cells are in which they're produced are influenced by energy fields? We'll have to wait and see. Until recently, alternative and complementary therapies, including energy work, were felt to be too mysterious. Well, I would argue that it's only been recent decades or generations that have seen it that way, and prior to that, it was very normalized. Um, Now, science and energy practitioners are discovering similar results. However, waiting for the research does not change the fact that patients are seeking healing options and giving us very positive feedback. Love that. Now, here's one that I thought was cool. Again, there's so many studies on this, and I just encourage you, if there's a specific thing, whether it has to do with reproductive or not, take a look. But this study is on the impact of Reiki on episiotomy recovery and perennial pain. So, if you're unfamiliar, an episiotomy is a practice that is thankfully becoming less common now, but it's a practice of cutting the perineum. As to, like, get ahead of tearing, and there was quite some time, I think, in the 1900s where that was being automatic. Now, automatic episiotomies are not policy at any hospitals I've been to, although I live in a more progressive area in California, so it's possible it's still routine at other hospitals, but in general, it is the concept of, like, cutting and then they'll stitch you up after. Um, and it's under the belief that that would, um, reduce your tearing, but something we can look at the evidence for another day. So, yeah, energy therapies, they're investigating the impact applied to postpartum people who had spontaneous childbirth without instrumental delivery on postpartum episiotomy recovery and perennial pain. So here they were doing sessions of 35 to 40 minutes, applying to the intervention group on postpartum first day, second day, and seventh day. The control group had a higher pain average than the intervention group. The Reiki applied to postpartum people who had spontaneous childbirth had a positive impact on episiotomy recovery due to its impact on edema and reduced perineal pain. Are you going to let me read it? Yay! Let's see. I always just like to cut to the conclusion, but you know, I think this far in our show, y'all kind of see how I read things. So let's see here. Are you gonna let me enhance this? Okay. So conclusion. As a result of the research, it was detected that Reiki implemented to the postpartum people who had spontaneous childbirth has had a positive impact on episiotomy recovery. It reduces perineal pain in postpartum, and the number of randomized controlled studies should increase. It might be recommended that studies in which Reiki are combined and compared with various non-pharmacological methods are carried out. So here they're saying, for episiotomy, for postpartum pain, Reiki is evidence-based to support. Let's look at another one. This is the effects of Reiki on post-cesarean. And what I like about this is that it looked not only at the pain, but it also looked at anxiety um, and hemodynamic parameters. I'm going to look up that definition just so I don't misspeak. Hemodynamic. Oh, hemodynamics is a study of blood flow, pressure, and physical forces within the cardiovascular system. Cool. Okay. I kind of knew that, but, and yeah. Okay. So blood pressure, heart rate, blood vessel diameter, viscosity, and friction. So this is the juicy one that I love looking at, because there was one study that said, it was this one in Turkey. Let me see here. Oh, this is the one. This is the one that looked, yeah. I'll hold off. I'm jumping all over. But so this study was about investigating the effect of Reiki on pain, anxiety, and hemodynamic parameters post-op days 1 and 2 for people who had a cesarean delivery. the study took place. This is, yeah, in Turkey. 90 patients, equalized by age and number of births, were randomly assigned to either a Reiki group or control group. So results. The age, let's see. The study demonstrated beneficial effects of Reiki application over usual care on the reduction of pain, anxiety, and breathing rate, as well as the analgesic needs for 3 days post-cesarean section. So, what it demonstrated was that Reiki application reduced the intensity of pain, the perceived anxiety, and breathing rate. However, it did not seem to affect their pulse rate, their blood pressure. Um, so their conclusion was to recommend it as a pain and anxiety relief method, especially because it's non-invasive and has no known side effects or no negative effects on existing treatments or therapies. And that's a big one. When I've done other look at research prior, um, for Reiki in general, is that most providers would say whether it's placebo effect, whether it is just the impact of being seen and witnessed and held, either way, it doesn't hurt. And by that, they're recommending it. So let's see. I would say another thing that is on my mind when it comes to doing a study like this in Turkey is what is the baseline spiritual culture like? I wonder if the openness to things like laying hands, to faith healing, to a more pronounced presence of um, valuing energy and healing, faith healing, culturally would also lend itself to more openness to receive. And I think about that as a practitioner and the like consent of folks in energetically, like people feeling open to even considering it, to people believing that it can work. So there's so many different influences with something that's tough to measure. Let's see. And then, oh no, did I not do my link? I think we're going to cut it there in terms of looking at studies, because the other things I was looking at, even though this one had something around, um, this is saying that there were no changes in terms of blood pressure and heart rate. There was a different study that actually did see changes. And so that was a study on distance Reiki. Let me just see if I can search that. So the most one that was interesting for me, um, here we go. One that was interesting for me was the effect of distance Reiki. And so this is something I get a lot of questions about in my work because I do mostly work from home now. And when we are present in person doing Reiki, again, that oxytocin can flow, that can support with pain reduction or felt pain reduction. And that might feel different from a distance Reiki session where we are on Zoom and I'm guiding somebody into there. I am connecting with them remotely. I am still imagining my hands connecting with their energetic body, but there is no obviously physical touch, given that we're usually on Zoom. And we don't even have to be on Zoom. I've worked with many healers that we just have a time where I lay down and rest. And the first time was so trippy. That was about 6, 7 years ago, where I could feel them working through my body. And that's more of like, that's not something everyone will feel. I have a very physical way of responding to energy work, and I have more of this like sensory way of experiencing. But when I described to the practitioner after, they were like, yep, yep, that's exactly where I was and what I was doing. So, looking here at the study, let's see. The study investigated the effect of distance Reiki on the holistic well being of people with no acute or chronic diseases. This was 180 healthy people living in a city in Turkey. They attended 20-minute distance Reiki sessions for 4 consecutive days. So there was a statistically significant difference between pre-test and post-test 1 and 2 holistic well-being scale subscale scores, and a statistically significant difference between pre-test and post-test positive and negative effect schedule and subjective vitality scale scores. So the conclusion was that they improved their holistic well-being, helped them develop a positive mood, experience and perceive less sadness, and develop subjective vitality and cognitive awareness. Um, Now, I don't know, I may have been reading something different yesterday, but there was one study that was saying that they determined that distance Reiki did not support a difference in perception of pain, but the patients did show lower blood pressure and heart rates. So, again, everything is up to the studies. Yeah, you made it. But I think that's pretty fascinating. Like one study is showing here, like all of them are basically saying there's some kind of positive impact. We can't quite name exactly why. We've tried to measure it through electromagnetic things. We've tried a self-reporting, do you feel better? Yes or no, how are you doing? And between both of those, one study saying like, yeah, again, this that last one about cesareans was saying like their pain went down, but we don't see their blood pressure or heart rate changing. And one of those reasons might also just be that something like a cesarean is a very intense surgery, and that the level of need is just higher than what Reiki can offer and like supplement and cater to. So they're not seeing the changes in BP or heart rate. But then for distance Reiki to be to have measurable lower heart rates and blood pressure through a 20-minute distance session, that's pretty fascinating. And again, what all of them have concluded pretty much is that there's no harm in trying, and that because there's really no negative side effects, like this should be offered as a supplement. I think some more insurances are even covering it, recommending them to folks now. I haven't personally looked into um, being an in-network Reiki provider, but now I'm kinda getting curious because, like I said, I looked up this evidence in the very beginning. I actually haven't I haven't relied on knowing what necessarily the evidence is for Reiki because it's just had such positive impact for my clients. And so I kind of feel like reading a couple testimonials that are speaking to what their experiences are, because the way that I do it and the way that I was taught, I know there's so many different styles. Some people pull out crystals. That's not really my thing. The thing that I've more leaned into in recent years is actually the voice as well, and singing. It just felt intuitive as I was doing it. I feel called to sing and to vocalize. Um, and because I'm mostly doing distance sessions that will be on mute a lot of the time so people don't hear me, but the times where I have done it in person, um, my clients have said how that was a really positive experience for them. So let's see. I'm gonna read you, reading you on tooting my own horn of these testimonials. So I just want to focus on Reiki. So this one said, her distance Reiki session made me feel empowered and affirmed how divinely guided I am in this lifetime. This was a Reiki one. When I booked my session, I'd been struggling for over a month with overwhelming grief. I felt disconnected from myself, my guides, and was stuck in a negative headspace. Siobhan is a gentle, loving, and caring guide. I cried within the first 5 minutes of our meeting and felt so safe and held in my emotions. The Reiki was very soothing. And it is experienced as a guided meditation if you're curious about how this even works. It's usually, we get on a call, we talk about your intentions, you can share where you're at, and then I ask you to get comfortable, guide you in, usually with some music or background track, into a guided meditative experience where you receive. And if you've done a trance journey, I tend to talk a lot more, channel what I'm seeing and guide people around. But in my more traditional Reiki sessions, I'm usually letting you be less verbal. I know sometimes when I'm getting a lot of visuals that I'm taking notes or just remembering them to share after you come out of the experience. And then there are times where I'm not getting really any visuals, and I'm just being called to certain areas, clearing energy intuitively, singing. And then when I check in at the end is usually when people will tell me what they've been seeing. So, like I said, it is a really, really supportive practice to clearing energy, to hearing your own intuition, oftentimes connecting and trusting that what you're imagining while in that space might be visits from your spirit guides, from your ancestors. Um, let's see. A lot of these are focused on grief. So, this one, I recently experienced two deaths just days apart, and this session is the reason I didn't feel stuck and frozen. Instead, I felt so in touch with the parts of me that needed to heal and didn't feel lost about where to start. So, shout out to my clients. Shout out to everyone who's trusted me with that. Like I said, my pipeline was traditional distance, more so distance Reiki, um, into then blending with hypnosis and spiritism to be more active in the spirit work of what I'm doing in those sessions and in that moment. But it's just so cool to see that, again, over 100 studies here that are all concluding that at minimum, people are feeling less pain and less stress. And even if we just focus, I was reading more again, I'm kind of just like overwhelming y'all with the number of studies and overwhelming myself. Um, but there's so many just speaking to the impacts of Reiki just for mental health. So that's the evidence. The evidence there is that yes, anybody that you feel you trust and feel safe with, having their presence close to you, it's just like that baby. It's like the evidence of skin to skin and what that does to regulate a baby's temperature and heart rate and wellness when they're first out. We still work that way. We can experience less stress and more peace by having the presence of somebody that cares about us and that sees um, and honors us just by the mere presence. And then from there, the possibilities only increase when you have somebody who is trained with how to hold that space, who is trained with their own channel, who cares for their own channels, and that is devoted to a practice of channeling energy and caring for their energy so that they can be a channel for you. I will say that the one risk is that anybody can become a Reiki practitioner and that it is not a regulated or licensed field. So I would recommend always looking for somebody that has testimonials to ask questions about their spiritual practice if you feel called and you want to know. Um, there have been reports and like TikToks of people who said that they had, quote, demonic experiences with Reiki and that were really negatively impacted. And to that, I would say that is something that is not about Reiki, and as much as it is about practitioners and the spirits they consciously work with. I would always recommend looking for somebody who is not only subscribing to a love and light mentality, who recognizes that there are complexities, and I don't really like to say light and dark, just it feels racist sometimes, but the like shadow side of things are not something to fear. There's something to look at and to embrace, and in fact that's something that Reiki can bring light to and help us to grow in, is the less savory parts of life and spirit. And so always check that your practitioner shares values about humanity with you. If this is why it always turns political, because if a Reiki practitioner cannot see themselves connected to a world that needs us to speak up at times for the freedom of oppressed people, for trans people, for indigenous people, disabled people worldwide, for the land. If they do not have a relationship to land and all they do is kind of mosey about, Mexico and Southeast Asia on these siloed, usually white leaning spiritual communities, then they likely will not have the land rooted relationships to effectively give you the fullness of what you can receive in that space. So that's my conclusion there. I'm going to close this out now with what I promised, which was let's see, which was sharing with y'all the evidence-based tool every single person can learn and use to support reduction of pain, stress, any of it. Obviously, focus was that first word we looked at, which is complementary. It's never a replacement for medical care. It is a first response that can help you discern if you need medical care. Oh, great example. Me having an allergic reaction the other day in my garden. I was in my garden. I started to imagine just like, I just wanted to rip off my skin, and I was feeling so itchy. And at first I thought it was energetic because I don't know, just what I was up to. And I began with a practice of being in my energy and Reiki. I literally started with like placing my hands, and after it took about 2 minutes of that to be like, okay, no, like you need to get in the shower. There's something on you, and continuing this practice of imagining energy cycling. It took about 30 minutes for me to observe my body, feel my throat tightening, and be like, okay, time to call 911. So just sharing what that can look like. I'm totally fine. But it was quite alarming for a second. It didn't escalate quickly, which is why I wasn't panicked. But shout out to Jem, Birth of the Divine, who, when I shared the story, was like, that just sounds like if I didn't know any better, sounds like an early labor story. And I was thinking, like, yeah, practicing attending births has really helped how I respond to potentially urgent situations. Sometimes an allergic reaction is not an emergency. Sometimes it is, but it takes presence and to decide and just trusting yourself of when to take action. So the secret tip that I wanted to share, which is not a secret at all because we saw the evidence is there, that simple physical touch helps oxytocin to surge, which helps your body to feel safer and to progress, and your baby to feel safer, it encourages contractions for your baby to feel safer to proceed and through their birthing process. And so for the last kind of 5-10 minutes here, I'm going to play a little meditation track. So, and invite in Reiki, and I invite you to consent out loud or in your heart to receiving this energy work wherever you're at, whenever you're watching. This can work if you open to it, and share in the chat after if it supports your stress levels, your inner peace, and maybe even a little bit of your physical experience. Else, I'm going to share this in a way that you could repeat um, should you ever find yourself in a situation of wanting to calm down anybody in your presence. This also works great for your pets. It works even for your plants. That was one of my first practices with my teacher, Tiffany, was having me practice being in relationship with a house plant and charging that with more life force and seeing what could happen. So I always like to begin with taking 3 grounding breaths wherever you're at. And with those breaths, imagining myself rooting into the earth, beginning with acknowledging the land that I'm on. Well, there's so many words for this energy. Ultimately, I think the simplest way to see it is as opening up your channel to connect with the life around you. So often imagining myself in connection with this tree outside my window, with any significant plant or wildlife that is in close proximity to you. And this is nervous system wisdom, that perception of our connection to other life is supportive to our safety. And as our rainbow of readiness shows, it's where optimal functioning and growth can happen. And just noticing for yourself as you're in this place, the ways that energy enters your body and leaves it. And if you haven't already, taken your hands and place them somewhere on your being where you would like energy directed to. Or you can also place them in Gasho position, which is something we learn in Reiki. And that looks like prayer hands with some space in between for the energy to move. In fact, if you practice inhaling and exhaling into the space, some even describe almost feeling this energy field thicken or get some body to it. Now, so far, you may have just been breathing with your natural breath. But on your next exhale, I encourage you to release all of that energy, emptying your lungs, imagining all the way down to your pelvic floor, exhaling and breathing through the nose, filling in your womb space, filling in right around your navel. And on your exhale, this breath that Marika Clymer taught us involves releasing through the mouth with a little bit of friction from the throat. While your mouth is still closed is fine. And feeling a little bit of friction and heat build coming from this deep place. So it's like the fire deep in your belly is being slowly released. And that energy releasing from your hands. You might even start to feel your palms get a little warm, maybe a little sweaty. And just practice that breath for yourself. I like to imagine it coming up into my heart on the inhale and then spreading down through my hands to wherever I've placed them. And today at the center of my intention is anyone listening to this right now, adding to your vitality. Thank you for being present with me today. Thank you for being present with your breath, with your energy. So much is possible when we believe in the power of our presence. And with all the evidence that we looked at today, while the numbers can vary and the conclusions can vary, the truth that I'm walking away with today is that having the ability and practicing the ability to feel safer in our own bodies, to lend that safety through our presence to others, whether they're birthing children or versions of themselves. This is the work of liberation. We have the power to, as all these studies said, decrease anxiety, perception of pain, to increase pleasure. that can bring our blood pressure to supportive levels, that can slow down our heart rates. And none of it is magic. It's just the biological truth of being living beings that recognize that we're here among life, not to control it, but to just be. And so I hope that's the conclusion today. That the power of being you and being present is measurable and healing. Let me know in the chat how you're feeling if you did that practice with me. And anytime I close a Reiki practice, my teacher Tiffany taught me to say, I release your energy back to you. I call my energy back to me. Thanks for joining episode 6 of Crowning. And if you're interested in Reiki or energy work, or as now that I've explained all of this, will move forward with calling it for myself intuitive palm healing. I offer this in a group setting. March 23rd will be a Monday evening at the Church of Soft Power virtually, and that is my free group Reiki energy work that I do every month. And these will be available in one-on-one settings very, very soon, as well as recordings is what I'm working on. So thank you. Thanks for being here with me and releasing you all with love and gratitude. And I'll see you next Wednesday on Crowning.